Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back, my daughter-in-law said at dinner. My son, the house was never really yours anyway. I moved out without a word. The next day, I went to just smiled and nodded. Follow my story until the end and comment. The city you're watching from, so the bank, and I'm glad to have you here. I can see how far my story has reached. The dining room felt different without Noelle's presence. The mahogany table that had hosted countless family dinners now seemed too large, feeling like half of my soul had been ripped away. The grief still sat heavy in my chest. Too empty. Pass the potatoes, Myrtle, Romy said. My daughter-in-law had never used a warm tone with me, but tonight, there was. Despite the three of us sitting around it, I kept glancing at his empty chair, expecting to see him there with his gentle smile and calming presence. I reached for the serving bowl, my hands still trembling slightly, his at 71. I thought I'd prepared myself for this day, but nothing could have. The funeral. It had been exactly 1 week since we buried my husband of 32 years. 1 week since I'd stood at his graveside, making every breath feel labored. The son who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, now voiced sharp enough to cut glass. Something different, something colder, had drained me more than I'd expected, prepared me for the hollow ache that followed me everywhere. Now, Wade, my 43-year-old son, sat between us like a referee who'd already chosen sides. He'd barely looked at me all evening, attention focused entirely on his wife of 15 years, couldn't even meet my eyes. The service was beautiful, wasn't it? I offered, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. Your father would have loved seeing so many people there. Romy set down her fork with deliberate precision. Yes, well, that's actually what we need to discuss with you, Myrtle. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I looked between her and Wade, searching for any sign of the warmth that should exist between family members who just shared a loss. Instead, Romy straightened in her chair. Wade and I have been talking, she began, her voice assuming the posture she used when delivering. Found cold calculation in Romy's eyes and uncomfortable avoidance in my son's. What do you mean? I asked, though part I blinked confused. Too much. I've been managing. The words hit me like a physical blow. Moved. I'd seen it before, usually when she was explaining why Wade couldn't visit me as often, or why family. Noelle and I built our life here, grew up here. Wade finally spoke. Of me. Already dreaded the answer. Ultimatums. Traditions needed to change to accommodate her preferences, taking on that false sweetness she used when she wanted something. Now that Noelle is gone, this house is going to be too much for you to handle alone. This house for over 30 years. I know every creaky floorboard and temperamental faucet. That's exactly the problem, Romy continued, her mask of pleasantness slipping slightly. You're Wade, and I think it would be best if you moved. Not getting any younger, and maintaining a house this size is expensive. Somewhere more suitable. My home. His voice barely above a mumble. Mom, Romy's right. The upkeep alone is going to be overwhelming for you. I'm not helpless, Wade, I said, hearing my voice crack slightly. And this house, your father and I saved for years to buy this place. Every room holds memories of our life together. Romy's expression hardened. Memories don't pay utility bills or property taxes. Be practical, Myrtle. I stared at her. This woman would systematically push me out of my son's life for 15 years. The woman who'd convinced Wade that Sunday dinners with his mother were too much pressure and that holiday visits needed to be balanced between families, which somehow always meant more time with her relatives. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, though I could feel the answer forming like ice in my stomach. We think you should look in tune of those nice senior communities, Romy said, her tone suggesting she was doing me a tremendous favor. Somewhere with activities and people your own age. It would be so much better for you than rattling around in this big empty house. I turned to Wade, desperately hoping to see some sign that he disagreed with this plan. Wade, you really think I should sell the house where you grew up? Where your father and I? It makes sense, Mom, he interrupted, still not meeting me eyes. And honestly, Romy and I could use the space. We've been talking about expanding our family, and this house has so much potential. The meaning behind his words crashed over me like a cold wave. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted my house, the home Null and I had lovingly restored room by room over 3 decades. Now that the surrounded, live your grief, pack your bags and never come back. Romy's voice suddenly lost all pretense of civility. The house was never really yours anyway. The Spanish word for father-in-law rolled off her tongue with casual cruelty, as if she was discussing disposing of old furniture instead of throwing out her husband's mother. Wade looked up then, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even guilt, but then smiled and nodded. She's right, Mom. This house was Dad's, and now it's mine. You were just living here. I felt my world tilt on its axis. Just living here as if 32 years of marriage, of building a life and raising a family amounted to nothing more than extended house sitting. I see, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Inside, something was breaking apart. Not just my heart, but me understanding of who my son was, who my family was. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I'll need some time to 2 weeks. Romy cut me off. That should be plenty of time to find somewhere suitable and arrange for movers. 2 weeks? Not 2 months, not even a reasonable timeline to grieve and plan. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. Would finally looked directly at me, and what I saw there was worse than anger or hatred. It was indifference. Complete, casual indifference to my pain. It's for the best, Mom, he said, as if he was convincing himself as much as me. You'll see. I walked upstairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Noel, each step feeling like I was climbing a mountain. The room still smelled like his cologne, and his reading glasses were still on the nightstand where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older than 71, her silver hair limp and her blue eyes dulled by shock and grief. In 2 weeks, I would have to leave this room where I'd said goodbye to Noel just 7 days ago. I would have to pack up 32 years of marriage into boxes and surrender it all to a son who just told me I'd never really belonged here anyway. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something else began to stir. Beneath that grief and shock, a small, hard kernel of determination. Noel had always been the one who handled our finances, but he taught me to be thorough, to pay attention to details. Tomorrow, I would start making arrangements. I would call the bank and begin the process of figuring out exactly what I was entitled to. Because if Wade and Romy thought they could just erase me from this family without consequence, they might be in for a surprise. The first thing I needed to do was understand exactly what Noel had left behind and to whom. The morning sun felt different streaming through the kitchen windows as I sat alone at the breakfast table, nursing my second cup of coffee. 10 days had passed since that awful dinner, and the house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. Wade and Romy had already been by twice to assess the space, measuring rooms and discussing renovations as if I were invisible. Yesterday, I'd overheard Romy on the phone with a contractor, scheduling estimates for once the old woman moves out. I'd spent those 10 days in a strange bubble of numbness, mechanically sorting through belongings and trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. But this morning, I finally felt ready to face the practical matters Noel would have expected me to handle. The drive to First National Bank took 15 minutes through the familiar streets of our neighborhood. I'd been making this same drive for over 20 years, usually with Noel in the passenger seat, handling our banking business while I waited in the car. He'd always been protective of our finances, not because he didn't trust me, but because he said it was one less thing for me to worry about. Now I wished I'd paid more attention. Mrs. Patterson, the bank manager, greeted me with the careful sympathy reserved for recent widows. Mrs. Henderson, I was so sorry to hear about Noel. He was such a gentleman, always asking about my grandchildren. Thank you, Helen. He spoke fondly of you too. I settled into the chair across from her desk, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. I need to understand my financial situation. Noel handled everything, and I'm afraid I'm rather lost. Helen's expression softened with understanding. Of course. Let me pull up your accounts. She turned to her computer, fingers clicking across the keyboard. After a moment, hairy brows rose slightly. Oh my, is something wrong? My heart jumped. Had Wade and Romy somehow already gained access to our accounts? Not wrong exactly. It's just there are quite a few accounts here, more than I was expecting. Helen's voice held a note of surprise. Let me start with the joint checking account you and N use for household expenses. She printed out a statement and slid it across the desk. The balance was modest but comfortable enough to cover my expenses. For several months, if I was careful. Relief flooded through me. At least I wouldn't be destitute now, Helen continued. There's also a savings account in both your names. Another sheet of paper appeared. This balance was significantly larger, enough to sustain me for years if necessary. That's wonderful, I said, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. Noah was always careful about saving. Yes, he was very methodical, Helen agreed, but she was still frowning at her screen. Mrs. Henderson, I'm seeing several other accounts here that I need to verify. Some appear to be in your name only. When was the last time you reviewed your complete financial portfolio with Noel? My name only, I echoed, confused. That doesn't sound right. Noel managed all our finances. Helen's fingers flew over the keyboard again. According to our records, there are 4 additional accounts. 2 CDs, a money market account, and this is interesting, a trust account that was established 5 years ago. My head began to spin. I don't understand. Noel never mentioned any of this to me. May I ask, did your husband ever express concerns about your family situation? So Metameslians established separate accounts as a form of protection. The question caught me off guard. Protection? From what? I'm not sure what you mean. Helen hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. Sometimes when clients have complex family dynamics, perhaps concerns about inheritance disputes or external pressures, they take steps to ensure their spouse's financial security. I thought about N's behavior over the past few years, how he'd started asking pointed questions about Romy's spending habits, how he'd grown quiet whenever Wade mentioned their financial struggles, how he'd insisted on handling all our banking personally, never allowing Wade to accompany him, even when our son offered. Can you tell me about these other accounts? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Helen printed several more pages. The first CD has been rolling over annually for 7 years. The second was opened 3 years ago. The money market account has been receiving automatic transfers from your joint checking account. Small amounts, 50 here and there, but over time. She handed me the statements. The number swam in front of my eyes. These weren't modest emergency funds. These were substantial amounts of money, enough to buy a house, enough to live comfortably for decades. How is this possible? I asked. I never signed anything. I never actually. You did, Helen said gently, pulling out a file folder. Your signatures are on all the paperwork. It appears Noel brought you in to sign documents, probably telling you they were routine banking updates or insurance forms. I stared at the papers she showed me. There was my signature dated and witnessed on forms I didn't remember signing, but looking at the dates, I could place some of them.